Hi, I'm Lisa Niven Kelly, and today I'm here to teach you how to make my Shabangle bracelet. This has been a really popular class that I've been teaching, and I'm excited to bring it to you here online at Beaducation.com. So one thing that you need to do before we do this class is pop over and watch my coiling on a drill class. And we're going to build a big old coil to incorporate into this bracelet, and you need a variable speed drill for that. So go check that out if you don't know how to do that already. Then come on over and let's get started. Here are the tools we're going to use in today's class. A chain nose plier, round nose plier that has a nice thick base at about 6 millimeters, a flush cutter that's pointed. We're going to use a point to get into tight little spots to cut apart our coils. And we're also going to use this when we cut our 14 gauge. So I want to point out with this specific cutter, it says on the product page to not cut that thick, but I show you how to cut away from the tip, and we're only cutting it once. If you're cutting 14 gauge all day, this is not the cutter for you. Cutting 14 gauge once every couple months, not a problem. This guy will be fine. Soft tape measure, a Sharpie pen, and for coiling, we're going to need a ring clamp, a variable speed drill, and this is a mandrel that we're going to coil on. This specific one is a hard steel mandrel. It's just dipped in copper. It's not made out of copper. I find it at a welding store, and it's about 1 millimeter thick, which is about 18 gauge. You can also use any hard wire that's that thick. You can use a sterling wire, you can use a piano wire, anything will work. In addition to all these goodies, don't forget your safety goggles or safety glasses. When we're coiling wire, there's wire flying all over the place, so protect your eyes. Here are the materials we're going to use to make our Shabangle bracelet. I've got an ounce of 22 gauge round dead soft sterling wire, and 22 gauge, let's see, an ounce is 22 feet, so that's about how much we'll use. And I have pre-oxidized this wire for a variety of reasons, which I will get to. If you are going to pre-oxidize your wire, you'll need your oxidizing solution of choice. I used liver of sulfur, as well as some pro polish pads or fine steel wool and a polish cloth. This is 14 gauge, and I use about 1 foot. And here is our variety of beads. I'm going to use a lot more than this. This is just the sample for our discussion here. But I used, for today's class, 4 millimeter and 3 millimeter Swarovski crystal. You can use any beads. Just make sure they're not larger than 4 millimeter, or they don't really flow nicely with the bracelet. So I used, the color beads I used about 75, and with the Bali silver Thai silver mix that you see in there, tiny little beads, again under 4 millimeter in size, I use about 50 of those. And you see some sprinkled in coils that we treat as beads. I'm going to show you how to make those. So now's the time, like I mentioned, that you want to go watch our free coiling on the drill class if you haven't already. And then pop on back here, and let's go ahead and coil this wire. So I've got my 18 gauge, which is about 1 millimeter mandrel in the chuck. I'm just going to tuck the tail of my 22 gauge in here so it anchors it. And I've got about 6 feet of 22 gauge pre-oxidized wire kind of coming down and hanging out on the floor, and it's going to feed up as we coil. So let's get started here. You want to feed it up nicely with your thumb here, and remember the goal is to get the coils right next to each other, no gaps and not overlapping on itself. And once you're a little ways out from the chuck, you can bring in the handy dandy ring clamp. I'm going to put the wedge in the bottom, and then this will help guide up the wire. And you can go real fast. I'm going to coil this until my wires run out, and then I'll come back and show you how to take it off and cut it up. So now I finished my long coil. I got about 10 inches of coil from that 6 feet, and I slid it off of my mandrel, and now I'm going to cut it up into smaller coils. First, I'm going to cut 3 2-inch coils off, and then the other coils, the remainder, I'm going to cut up into about 1/4 inch lengths. So once you slide off your mandrel, you're going to have a little tail sticking up. I just want to show you real close up here how to cut that tail off and how to cut the coils off without like pokey parts sticking up. So your first thought would be to come in and just place your cutters right there and trim. But if you do that, you're still going to have a little bit poking up like that. Let's see if I can get a little closer. See that little bit poking up? So what you want to do is come in with the very tip of your cutter and put one side of the cutter inside the coil so that you can cut the coil where it's already kind of looping around. And then it leaves it nice and flush and won't catch on any clothing or scratch you. Okay? So now we're going to want to cut these into 2-inch lengths. So let's just get our handy dandy ruler here. And that's about 2 inches to cut this guy up. Now, I'm going to come in with my cutter. I'm not just going to place it on the coil and snip, because I'm likely going to push down one of those coils and close up my hole. I'm going to press lightly with my cutter, and all I'm doing right now is separating the coils so I get an opening. So I'm just using it to open it up like that. And now with the very, very tip, and this is why you want that pointed tip cutter, I'm going to go in and cut that wire in the back. See the wire back there that's connecting this piece and this piece? That's what I want to snip. And if you do that right, you'll end up with 2 clean ends. If one end isn't perfectly clean, then you would just come in and trim it up by doing what we did to cut off the tail. And that's going to happen a lot. You might have to clean up your ends a little bit. Okay, so there's one 2-inch. I'm just going to use this guy to measure the next one. Right about there. It doesn't have to be exact. Cut that guy apart. And right there. So these 3 pieces equal 6 inches. So I've got about 4 inches of coil left. And for that, I'm going to cut them a little bit smaller. I'm going to cut them about this size. And anywhere from this size, which again is about 1/4 inch, to smaller. You don't want longer than 1/4 inch because they kind of don't flow around your bracelet like the 2-inch ones will, and they don't sit in the width of the bracelet well. They just will kind of stick off the end. So I might do a couple smaller ones. And again, these little coils we're just going to use as beads when we get to that step of the bracelet. So go ahead and cut up the rest of your 4-inch remainder coil here, set them aside, and we'll get started on the rest of the bracelet. Before we start building the bracelet, we need to talk about sizing. It's a little tricky, so bear with me. Okay, this bracelet is pretty thick, so you need to make it longer than you're used to. For example, my wrist is 6 inches, and I'm usually pretty comfortable with a 7-inch bracelet. But then I think about it, I'm usually talking about things that are flat, beads that are flat. When something gets taller and higher off your wrist, you need more length. So that's a scoop here. So what we're looking at, this is a bracelet that I finished yesterday. It's finished, it just hasn't been shaped into the round. I've got the ruler, and then this is a little graph to help you help explain what I'm about to tell you, and you can find this in your instructions. So what we need to know to begin is how much sculptural wire work we should do. And that's why I'm talking about this now. Because once you start doing this, this is fast and fun. You could go all day and have a 12-inch bracelet, and that's not going to work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build this hook. And then we're going to do this, and then we're going to build the eye. So the measurement we're going to talk about first is after we build our hook, when do we stop to cut and build the eye? So the first thing you need to do is take a soft tape measure and measure your wrist about where you're going to wear it, and measure it exactly. Not super tight and not loose, just the exact circumference of your wrist. And then to get the perfect bracelet, you're going to add 2 inches onto that measurement. Now this is kind of cheating, and it's just a test that I've done in many, many classes to know that that will work. But if you want an explanation, it involves pi and circumference. And when I teach this class and I make them do pi, I get dirty looks and lots of groans and moans. So I've simplified it, measure your wrist and add 2 inches. But think about it, what we're talking about here is how much room we need after we build it in this inner circumference. So we're working with pi, inner diameter, all kinds of confusing things like that. Trust me, let's just measure your wrist and add 2 inches. So when you do that, measure your wrist and add 2 inches, that will give you your tip to tip length. So I'm just going to pull this down now so we can concentrate on this little image. The tip to tip is the end of your hook to the end of your eye. So again, we're going to start by building the hook, and then you're going to have your 14 gauge wire just kind of lengthening out here. And that hook measures a 1/2 inch. And that's the finished hook. The finished eye is going to measure a 1/4 inch. Those two added together is 0.75 of an inch, right? So 1/2 inch plus 0.25. Subtract that off of 8 inches, which is your end-to-end measurement, and you get 7.25. That's for me because I'm making an 8-inch bracelet. So 7.25 is this measurement here. I know this sounds crazy, but stay with me. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our hook, then we're going to measure, if you have my size bracelet, 7.25 inches from there, make a Sharpie mark right there on our wire, and that's where we stop. We have to talk about this now because once you start doing your wire work, people just keep going, and you can't really shrink it. You can't grow it, so we need to know when to stop, cut, and make our eye. All right, so that's the overview. Now let's get started. It'll make a little more sense. We're going to start by building the hook part of the clasp on one side of our 14 gauge wire, and we're going to do a tiny little spiral there. This part, I've been told in class, is the hardest part. It's kind of hard to make a small spiral out of 14 gauge, so if you struggle with that, I'll show you how to just do a simple little hook at the end instead of a spiral. So I've got some 14 gauge copper wire here. You're going to want to practice it first before making it out of your very expensive sterling. So that's why I've got copper. First thing I'm going to do, I can see that my wire is a little bit pointy, so I want to start with a flush cut. So I'm going to take the flush side of my cutters, and notice I'm not using the tip just to make my flush cut. I want to preserve the tip. I'm back in the jaw a little bit and get my flush cut. And that's good. Now I'm going to come in with the tip of my chain nose, and you want a chain nose that has a very strong tip. If you struggle with this part, it might be because your chain nose are weak or too long, so you can't hold the tip of the wire. I'm going to hold the smallest part of the wire that I can hold with the smallest part of my plier. So just a teeny little bit. If I didn't give it that flush cut, I would kind of be slipping off because it was pointed like that. So grab a little bit, and I'm going to bend it up and over, kind of like making a basic loop, but really you're making just a little tiny kink. And you got to squeeze pretty hard here. Might slip off, but let's give it a try. See that? Pushing, see my fingers are turning yellow. I'm losing blood circulation because I'm pushing really hard. Okay. Now once you get to this point, you want to kind of squeeze it in. It's hard to keep going with the tip of your chain nose, so I'm going to come in and grab it. I need to open up the pin here because I have to open my plier more. I'm going to come in and grab that and squeeze. Now notice I'm holding it at this angle, not, let me get a better view for you, there we go. Not like this. I don't want to just squish it. I want to kind of go at this angle so I'm squeezing and tucking it. That would be ideal. So I'm really pinching in, and I'm doing this slow. I'm not just the pinching in because I want it nice and tucked. That is great. Let's see if I can get even closer for you. So again, if you are going to, well, you don't know yet, but if you do struggle by making the little spiral, just stop at this point. Let this be the tip of your clasp. Okay, so now I have this little kinked over part, and I'm going to form a tiny little spiral. So that goes flat within the jaws of my plier, way back towards a box joint. Squeeze, and then I'm going to push it around. Now if this is slipping, it's because the jaws of your pliers are too slippery. You have to really squeeze, and that's why I'm holding it way back here rather than out here, because I'll never get it, just keeps slipping. Right there. And you just want a little tiny spiral. That should probably be enough. If you build a bigger spiral than that, you're going to have to build a huge loop at the other end to accommodate it. See how that fits just perfectly? And if I made it, so if I made a bigger spiral, this loop would have had to be bigger, and it gets weaker if it gets huge. So it looks like it's about 1/4 turn around. I might be able to tuck it even just a teeny bit more. Now because you're squeezing so hard to get this to move, this little tip, you're likely going to put little jaw marks in there. And you're not doing anything wrong, it's just you had to hold it really hard. If that's the case and it bothers you, lay it on a bench block and hit it with the face of your chasing hammer to kind of take those marks out before moving on. Okay, so from here, we're going to move to the round nose plier to make the loop. I like these long ones because of the base. I like the thickness down here. I don't really use them up here, but I like this thickness down here. So I'm going to hold with the fattest part, and you could use, you know, any stepped round nose. I think this fat part down here is probably about 6 millimeters. I'm going to place that within my round nose and roll it around till it touches. And then come back with my chain nose. I'm going to open this a teeny bit and kink it to center. So that's going to be, let me pull in the finished piece, my little hook end. You're going to want to practice that a couple times in your copper. If I wanted to do it one more time, I just cut this guy off. Maybe I'll cut it a little long so it can be usable, and do it again. Okay, so practice that a couple times, and then go ahead and make it in your sterling, and we'll come back and get to the fun part. All right, so now we are back to this image because I need to mark my wire. I did my clasp, and it turned out I did get a couple marks in there with my chain nose, so I went ahead and hammered it just to flatten it out, which pulls out those marks. It looks lovely. So remember here, once the hook is made, I've decided, according to my little graph, that this sculptural wire work is going to be 7.25 inches. So that's what I need to measure right now so that I don't mess that up. So that 7.25 inches is measured from the end of the hook. So I'm going to go 7.25 and mark it right there. Keep an eye on this mark. Sometimes once you start rocking, you kind of wipe it off, and I've seen it happen in class, and then people keep going and they have a really big bracelet. Okay, so I'm ready to start doing the sculptural work. Now I've got all this excess wire because I just started with a foot, but I'm going to cut it, or maybe it was more than a foot. I'm going to cut it and do the loop end, the eye end of the hook and eye later. Don't do it now. Okay, just leave it long. Okay, so we're done with that. So now I'm going to pull in my 22 gauge, and we're ready for the fun part. This is about 3 feet. I've just cut a big piece. I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm going to start anywhere on this wire. Don't worry about cutting exactly 3 feet because you're about to see how very simple it is to add more wire once you run out, so no worries, okay? So I'm going to start like around halfway, which is here, and I'll probably just start here on the bracelet, and that's good. I'm not going to wrap super, super tight, so you'll be able to see that I can move my wire work up and down on the bracelet as I need to, which is why I'm not starting right at that end, okay? So this is sculptural wire. We're not trying to get a nice, beautiful coil on our core wire. We're just going to start to build. It's very messy and it's very forgiving. So I'm going to start and just go out about 1 inch and not be too tight. See how I'm just sort of laying it on there. And then maybe go back on myself a little bit. And then maybe continue the other direction. See how I'm starting to build there. And see how it's also moving on here. You don't want it too tight. So I'm going to continue to do that, and we're going to build this up around to the point where it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. And we're going to build the base first before adding the beads and the coils. So we're just going to continue with this. Now what's great about this technique is if you feel like there's a spot that's kind of naked once you've got all your beads on or whatever, you can just loop back and go over it again and see how we're being real messy here. I love working with the pre-oxidized wire, like I said, because you can really see where everything is with the shiny underneath. You could also pre-oxidize your core wire, that would work too. But today it works well for you to see what's happening. So I'm going to continue, la, 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 and I'm almost out of this side. So in this case, I'm going to just take, when I get down to the tail, and wrap it really tight on the core wire so that it will stay. Come in with my cutters and just trim. Okay, so that side is done. And again, trim with the tip so you don't have anything poking out. All right, so now I'm going to flip it over and work down the other side. And see, if I was really, really close here, I could either scoot the work down and use this wire to build up this end, or just leave it and loop over this guy and end up down here, and you'll see how it's just really do whatever you want. Sorry, I've got wire flying in my face. Okay, so let's build down this side here, and this part can go fast now that you know what you're doing. And it goes so fast that you'll see that maybe next time you introduce a new wire, you might want to do more than 3 feet. So again, I'm getting really close to the clasp here. I can continue, I can scoot it down. Let's leave it there so you can see how maybe I just want to go to the other side, and I'm just going to loop over all of this and continue down to the other side. I can flip it over if you want. Depends on what you're most comfortable with. And you can double back on yourself, keep going. What you don't want to do at this point or at the other point is have a really long length like that, where that's maybe coiled over, because it just looks awkward. So keep your stuff pretty close together. This is looking good for my base. I'm going to bring this guy over here. I'm going to show you how to add a new wire and then let you build up your base. So I'm going to get this nice and tight on here since it's the tail. Come in with the tip of my cutter. Trim that little guy off. Okay, so this is about where you want it before you start adding in beads, but I want it all the way to my line, so I'm going to add in another wire. So I'll be right back. Let me go cut another piece. So now I have another piece of my 22 gauge. I'm going to add this in just by tucking it under any wire, any of the existing sculptural wire. Pull it through about halfway. Don't let it get kinked up there. Don't spill my glass of water. And then just continue. So this guy is just going to sit aside, get over there, until it's his turn. And this one is going to continue on here. And I might be able to fill up this whole end with this wire. Can you hear my wire hitting my glass of water? I sometimes, when I start this out, I do it actually standing up, because this is a big piece of 22 gauge. It's just flinging around. I don't want to poke my eye out. That's why you want to have on safety glasses. I don't want it to hit the table too much and over harden it or fling my beads off the table. So just continuing here, almost to the end. You can see how this part can go really, really fast. I'm just randomly looping over. Try not to be too organized about this. Same goes, you'll see when you put on your beads, just straightening out this kink. Because if you try to be too organized, it just won't look right. It won't look sculptural. Okay, this is actually working out perfect, which is probably is not normal and probably won't happen with you, but it looks like this one end is completing the whole length just perfectly. So again, just like before, I'm going to go in and get it nice and tight on my core wire and trim it. Okay. And I'm right there at my line, so I'm going to leave it. So this wire is now just sticking out of the middle, which is fine. This is about where I want my sculptural wire to sit and the thickness that I want before I start adding the beads. What happens is if you add the beads too soon, they get buried and you don't really see them. But if you wait too long and you add the beads, then your bracelet gets really, really thick. So here's another big benefit of starting with oxidized wire rather than oxidizing your piece at the end, is at this point I can stop and polish this up and it'll give me more light coming from the inside of the depth of my bracelet. Whereas usually if you make the whole thing and oxidize the whole thing, you can only touch on the top when you go to polish, but we're going to polish at this point. It's going to give a little bit more depth. So let me grab a Pro Polish pad here out of my bag, and I'm just going to start polishing at this point. Go ahead and polish to your taste, but don't polish the wire. Leave this dark because we're going to get to that later. You don't have to do a lot. I'll just do a little bit on all the sides here. If there is certain spots you wanted to get into, I like to fold the Pro Polish pad and kind of tuck it in there, but at this point I don't need to do that. I can be pretty soft with it. Okay, so see how that's going to give me a little more light coming from inside. Now I'm going to go get my beads and show you how to strand those on. So now I've got the beads and coils that I'm going to incorporate into the sculptural wire work. And actually the first thing I'm going to do is lay on these 3 long coils. I'm going to do one kind of at this third and one right in the middle and one over at this third here. But my beads that I have, I today have chosen to work with some Swarovski crystals and some small Bali silver. And like I said when we talked about tools and materials, you don't want to have either of these beads be larger than 4 millimeters because they just kind of bulk off the end and it doesn't really work right. And we talked about what size to cut the coils. So I actually am just going to mix them all up. I don't want to try to be too organized about the whole deal, so it's just fine to have them all mixed up. And when I make these bracelets, I think that the last one I made, I used about 72 crystals and maybe almost that many Bali silver, tiny little ones. And it's up to you. It depends on how much color, how much bling you want it. In design ideas, I'll show you a couple different ones where I've used a gazillion crystals and a lot of Bali silver, but that's up to you how much you want to incorporate into the bracelet. Okay, so let's put the beads aside for a second. And all right, so we're left at the last stopping point. I have this side of my 22 gauge it's kind of sticking out the middle of my bracelet here. And when I go to lay these on, I can't start in the middle because I'm going to put on a coil and then it's going to put it like just to the side of the middle. If I want to start by putting on this middle coil, I need to start to just the side of the middle. Does that make sense? Let me show you here. So I'm going to come around and just, okay, that's a better starting point to put on this middle coil. And I don't think my table is level because I keep rolling away. So let's string on, I'll put this guy right in the middle. Let's scoot these aside. I'm going to string on my coil and see how I've got it just to the side of center. So I'm going to coil it this direction. I actually want to flip it around because I like to coil away from myself. And for this one, I'm going to push pretty hard so it really gets on there nice and tight and kind of fits into the grooves. See that? So that guy's kind of dead center. Then I'm going to feed over a little bit and put the other one on. Pardon me while I'm out of frame to get my coil. There it is. And then do the same here. Okay, so now I'm way over here. I have a choice. I can either, obviously I need to get this wire over there, which we've seen how easy that is, just loop, do, not too organized, just get yourself over there. I could do that and then put this guy on. But at this point, I might as well, while I'm journeying over there, I might as well put some beads on and show you how to do that. Okay, so let me pull my beads back in. Now when it comes time to add the beads, again, don't try to do a pattern of like 1 3mm crystal, 1 coil, 1 4mm, and repeat that, because it'll get lost. You won't even see a pattern, so don't waste your time. Just be a big old messy slob like me and pick up whatever beads sound good to you. I've got a crystal, I've got a coil, how about a Bali silver, and then maybe a couple other crystals. And I'm just picking up whatever color is nearby. I'm not really trying to pay attention to that. And I think I need new glasses. Okay, let the beads drop down. Okay, and now when you add these guys, you're gonna kind of just, I'm gonna add them right on the end here. Let them lay where they're gonna lay. They don't have to go right next to each other. See how that bead just, that crystal just popped up? That's fine, let there be space, no big deal. Lay the wire on tight and then continue back. So that looks a little light there, but I'm gonna come around with more wire as I go back and forth. So that's perfect for that. As I make my way over to the other side, I'm gonna go ahead and put on some more beads. You can also string a whole bunch of beads on and just kind of put 3 or 4 on, then some naked wire, then 3 or 4 on, and then some naked wire. It's up to you. If you want to save time that way, that works. I'll feed on a whole bunch so I can show you what that looks like. And don't forget your coils, little baby coils. Also, if you run out of coils and you love the way they look, you saw how easy it is to make them and cut them up. So just stop, take a length of your wire and make another thing of coils. All right, so this time I've strung on more. And I can definitely like lay them all down and wrap it on, or I can spread them out a little bit, hold these in my hand and get those guys to go on, maybe a little naked wire, maybe go back over itself. And it looks like in the process, I'm gonna run out of wire before I get to that other side to add my 2-inch coil, but that's okay. So let me pull it up closer here so you can really see how it's starting to look. It's just a little mess. And then I'm gonna feed over. I'm gonna add some more beads on. So you're gonna go back and forth in this manner until you've got it all covered to about this much thickness. And then I'm gonna show you how to wrap over the top. So off camera, I'm gonna build up a little bit to get myself over to here, and then I'll come back to add that other third of coil and bulk it up a little bit more. I added a whole bunch of beads along the length there, making my way over, and now I've come in with a close-up for you of my dirty oxidized wire hands and the piece here to show that it's time to tie off this wire. I'm going to add in a new one, and that's fine. I usually add in like wire maybe 3 or so times. So to take this wire and tie it off though, I don't really have any nice naked spot anymore on the core wire to do that nice tight coil. So what I'm going to do is wrap it around another wire where there's some space, and this one right here looks great, right next to it. That's perfect space to take this wire and coil it around that wire so that I can just trim it. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to kind of turn the wire so it goes underneath. See that? I'm going to tug on it, see if I can't get it nice and tight. There we go. And then do it again. It's essentially like tying a knot around that wire. So let's see if we can get nice and close for you. See See that little coil there? Now I've got this much length and I don't need that. I'm going to trim this. I'm going to trim it a teeny bit long so I have a tail that I can grab and pinch so that the tail sits under. I like my tails to be hiding underneath the wire work just in case they poke out at all. So that's great. That just looks like another little sculptural piece of wire work there, and it's all tied off. So I'm going to come in with another piece of the 22 gauge and just thread it under some of the existing wire work. Now if you were almost done, you could kind of decide where you want to add in this wire, like, oh, I really only need to do this part, so I'll add in right here, or I feel like it's naked over here, so I'll add in here and do the most of it here, but that last tail over here. I mean, you can see how you can weave back and forth with the wire, so you don't have to, you know, really set yourself to one spot, but kind of at this point you might be deliberate about where to add it in. So I still haven't added in that other third. Let me pull the beads in here. This guy, right? So I'm at the perfect spot now, so I'm going to put him on the wire. That is just too bent up at the tip. I'm just going to cut it off. Pull it down to the piece. About there, looks good to me. Get this crazy wire out of the way. It's gonna poke someone's eye out. Okay, I actually haven't really tacked in this wire, so I'm gonna give it one little wrap. There we go. Now scoot this down. And remember this bit, we hadn't done that over here yet. Nice and tight. Awesome. Okay, now I'm gonna bring my beads back in and thread on a nice little sampling. Don't forget your coils. You worked so hard on making them perfect. And I think they really add a great dimension. It makes it look like you were making this bracelet and you stopped and built a little coil and then wire worked on and stopped and built a little coil, but you can imagine how hard that would be to do. So this is just a little bit of trickery. Adds great texture. Okay. So let's start to bulk up this side here. Just let stuff fall where it wants. Now let's keep an eye on that line. There it is, tucked under there. I don't want to go beyond that. So right there, I'm going to reverse and go back the other direction. Now there are times where you kind of want to be really specific about where you lay certain beads. We're going to get to that when we come over here and find little naked spots, but this is a good point to talk about it because it's about to wrap that coil right over that other coil. It's going to bulk up that little section right there. So I'm actually just going to pull the coil out of the way and let a naked wire lay there, and then maybe place this coil over here where there's some space. So as you start to get towards the end, you're going to get more specific with where you lay the beads. All right, so I am just going to continue adding on beads. That guy had a hole that was too small, so he's a reject. Treat the tip of the wire kind of like a little needle. That's why I bent it up like that. It has an easier time picking up beads. Okay, and lay those guys down. Now here, this is interesting. I was just about to add these beads, and here, let me move this out of the way so you can see this. I was about to add these two beads, and they're the pod paraja. There's already one right there, and then I picked up two in a row, so maybe I want to just scoot away from that. I don't necessarily want three of the exact same color beads right next to each other. So I lay them on like that, and then maybe pick a color between them. Here's another interesting spot to talk about. Right here, I seem to be very bead heavy on this side, and this side is kind of naked, and that doesn't happen on purpose because I'm always rotating the way that I'm holding it, but pay attention to that at this point so you can start to fill in. So I'm going to continue on until this side looks more like this side, and then I'm going to come back. All right, so I have added in all the beads that I intend to add in. But you can stop at this point again and polish a little bit. And I might spend a little more time polishing than I did on the last layer because I want to polish all those little nooks and crannies and coils, because my next layer that I'm going to do is just going to be naked wire. And it's going to kind of cover everything and kind of pull it all in together. So I'm going to spend a bit of time here trying to get to the spots that once I cover with the naked wire, I'm not going to be able to get to them. Okay, so this is going to take some time. I'm going to do this off camera and be back in a second. So I've polished it all up, and I'm just going to kind of cycle through the bracelet here at this close-up so you can see where we are before we do the last wrap. There's a little tail of wire. See, I've got all my beads nice and clustered. And I added more beads than you initially saw in my dish there. I got a little crazy. All right, so now we're ready to take this last wire here. And like I said, I like to get it to this point and then do a naked wire over the entire bracelet to kind of tie it in. And this is very fast and simple. As you're doing this, see, I'm just looping over with my naked wire back and forth, kind of making a little overall cage. As you're doing this, if you're cruising along and you find a spot where you're like, oh my goodness, there's a little naked spot there, I wish I had put a bead there, then just pick up a bead and do it at this point. There's no reason why you can't do that. Okay, so you see how fast this took up that wire. I'm kind of towards the end here, so I might try to get my tail to just sit right next to that other one. What do you think? Let's do it. Grab my chain nose and really pull it tight. That's good. And then trim. Kind of tuck that tail down, but don't burnish it down too much. And my line is right underneath it, so I'm good there. So I would consider this part of the bracelet totally finished. I mean, we're going to go through and polish. So it's this part that needs that overall little last wrap. So I'm going to cut one more piece of wire. I think 3 feet will be overkill. I'm going to cut it around 2 feet, and that's just based on the fact that this was about 1 foot and it covered about 1/3 of the bracelet, so I've got 2/3 left. With that 2 feet, I'm going to put it in exactly in the middle, because then 1 foot can cover this part, 1 foot can cover this part, and I think that'll be perfect. That's going to be different for your bracelet because you may have been more wire heavy than me. The tighter you coil, the more wire you'll use because it actually sits in tighter, and so to bulk it up, you'll need more wire. So kind of play with it and see how much it takes. But I'm going to go ahead and do that, cover that, and then I'm going to polish and come back and show you where I'm at. Then we'll get to making the eye side of the hook and eye clasp. So I finished this guy up all the way end to end and polished it. I'm really happy with the way it looks. And that's really when you stop adding wire, is when you're happy. Then I was interesting, I pulled over the one that I made yesterday and I used a ton more wire on the shiny one that's not oxidized. As you can see, let me get really, really close for you. Lots more. It's thicker. You can't see the core wire at all. You can see it a little bit on this guy, but both looked good to me. So I guess it's just depending on your mood. Now, obviously this guy will take tons more wire and beads and cost a little more money, if that's a factor here, but I'm pleased with this one, so I'm going to stop. It's just some things to think about. So now what we're going to do is trim over here and make the loop, the circle, the eye, that's what it's called, the eye side for the hook and eye clasp. Now I know, because I've made this a million times over and over, that this takes about 0.75, 3/4 of an inch to make this size loop. You can measure it if you want. I just eyeball it. And again, if you still have some of that copper wire, I'd practice it first to make sure that this end will fit into the loop that you're about to make. I'll show you some problem solving as well. So I'm going to cut it flush side facing the piece I'm keeping, right about there. It looks like it's a little long. Let's go right there. Okay. And then coming back with my round nose that have the big base, I'm now just going to turn a basic loop. I'm going to make the biggest one that exists on my plier. Now, just like making basic loop, if you haven't done it before, go ahead and watch my free class on basic loops. But you want to hold the wire within the jaw of the pliers and not feel it poking out. If you do feel it poking out, you'll get a teardrop shape. So if that's something that's happened to you in the past, that's what's going on. And I'm going to roll away from me. Now this, again, this really thick wire, so I'm going to push really hard against the pliers so I really take on the shape. Loosen my grip, bring it back, stay on the same part of the plier, don't scoot up, squeeze, continue, do that a couple times until it touches, and yay, it touched exactly at the right spot. So now you have your little P. You need to come in with your chain nose and center it. That sometimes opens it a little bit, so I rock it shut with my round nose. So that looks great. If by chance you made your loop and it came around and touched the wire really early so that you had a little neck of naked wire between the end of your loop and your wire work, you could kind of stretch out your wire work and fill the gap. That works fine. Or if the opposite happened and your loop came around and hit here rather than right at the base, you can kind of squeeze your wire work in to give yourself a little bit of room. That's a little problem solving on that. Okay, so now I've got my whole long thing and I am going to bend it into a round shape. I do that kind of with the pad of my thumb, slowly. It doesn't matter which way your clasp is facing at this point because you're gonna shift it when you need to. See how it's coming around? So right now my clasp is sticking straight up and I don't want that because it'll catch on stuff. I want it to go to the side. So you have a little wiggle room there. Now same goes for my clasp or my eye here. You need to shift that so that your hook can go into it. So just grab it and manipulate it with your hands. Now hopefully my loop is big enough to accommodate my spiral. And it's actually not, which is two things. It's a bummer, and it's a great opportunity for me to show you what to do to fix that. If your spiral is huge and there's no way to make a bigger eye, then you're gonna have to cut this down. I would come in with my cutters and chop off part of it, pinch it in, and then have it go in. But this is so close that I'm hoping if I just make my loop bigger by kind of burnishing it down, down, down on my round nose to a bigger spot. See, I'm pushing, 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 and see how it's opened it up. And I'm gonna have to move my wire work out of the way. And that's just such a small amount that I'm not really concerned about shrinking my bracelet. Maybe that's gonna be better now. Yay, perfect, okay, good. So get your hook in there. And did you hear how it kind of clicked into place? It doesn't easily go in there. That's actually good because then it won't easily come off. So I'm just making everybody behave and get in the right position, fixing my shape. And this guy is done. Couple things here that I'm noticing. If this is really light right here on the wire work, now that's all finished, I'm like, gosh, this is a little light over here. At this point, I could add in 1 foot of wire and bulk it up, tie it off, no big deal. You don't have to do it when it's straight. So if you need any fixing at this point, that's fine. Now from here, I would probably just take it over to the sink and soap and water it to shine it up and get a little of that oxidation and dust left from the Pro Polish pad off. And from there, you can even throw it in the tumbler if you have a tumbler available. The tumbler will not hurt the crystals, it's just fine. In fact, the design ideas that I'm about to show you are in the tumbler right now, so they'll be nice and shiny for your viewing. But this guy is finished. Because the core wire is 14 gauge and it's really hard, it's really gonna keep its shape very, very nicely. let's talk about some design ideas. I just went into my stash and found a bunch of Shabangles that I made from teaching this class for a couple years. And apparently I really love this color palette because I had 3 of these, shiny wire and this fun little mixture of party colors. Now, if any of these I wanted to oxidize, I could certainly do it now. I don't have to start with pre-oxidized wire. If you change your mind later, you can go ahead and take the whole shiny thing and toss it in liver of sulfur till the whole thing turns dark and then polish it from there. So these all have that same clasp that we worked on. These are fun. This is one that I've made with sort of, I call this mixture of crystals ocean. This guy has a lot of wire. It's a little thicker than the one we worked on in class today. And I've used, I think, twice as many crystals. But I really love the way it looks with this pearl clasp. So with this one, I just did 2 loops at the end rather than a hook and eye. So you've got to think about your end result bracelet and kind of do the math and the recipe from there, keeping in mind the length of your handmade or your pre-made clasp if you're going that direction. So that's a nice one. Now these guys, I got really crazy, and this one here is actually made with 24 gauge. So it almost looks like it's got a little more texture because there's so much wire in it. There's just a ton, and I think I used like 3 packs of crystals, so probably, I don't know, 200 crystals. A ready-made clasp here, and then these big, huge cones, just to finish it in a fun way. I call this guy Super Shabangle, or this gal, I think this is a female. And again, just a fun little mix there. So that's when you really bulk it up. Here's the one we made today in class. It's a little lighter. The only other thing I would say design-wise on this one that we made, besides maybe adding a little more wire, totally up to you, is it does kind of bug me that this is shiny and the rest is oxidized. So I could oxidize this clasp right now by just using maybe a hydrochloric acid and just dipping it in till it turned dark, polish it up. Or maybe could have started with my 14 gauge pre-oxidized. That would have worked too. With this one, I just took a whole bunch of wire and just looped around and around and around and around and around, and I let the wire be pretty loose. See how wide it got? So these coils, if you want to refer to them as coils, got pretty wide. And then I hammered it slightly just to kind of make it more dense this way. So I laid it before I shaped it and hammered it a little bit. But it's one of my favorites. I actually wear this one a lot, and I really like the way that it looks on. Last but not least, this is a fun one that I kind of made, well, I made this out of all wire, no beads, and then I decided to hammer it. I was just getting crazy. I think it kind of looks like the Borg Queen for my fellow Trekkies out there. And I can't give you the exact recipe for this because it's a little tricky, so you're gonna have to play with it, but what I will tell you I learned is that I had to make my wire work a little shorter and leave exposed core wire on kind of to the side of the clasp, because as you hammer it, it grows. So as I hammered it, it kind of pushed it out a little bit. I think that probably makes sense to you. So it's a little flatter and just really, really sculptural. So it's definitely an option to make these bracelets out of only metal, no beads, maybe just wire and silver beads and no color. You can go that direction. And you can also play with using different wire. Why not use silver filled? I mean, sterling's pretty expensive right now. Use colored wire, use gold fill wire if you're feeling crazy. Go for it. Use whatever wire you want and have fun. All right, so we just did a whole lot of messy wire work. I hope you enjoyed it. I've made tons of these. As you can see, once you learn the technique, you can make them really quickly. And don't be afraid to use a lot of beads or no beads at all. Like, really change it up, get crazy, and I hope you had a good time. Thanks.